One day, the water is calm. The next, a loved one faces prison time, or a teenager spirals out of control. A sudden family crisis hits without warning, shattering the illusion of a peaceful life in an instant. In these moments of sudden social or familial collapse, our nervous systems immediately go into high alert. The brain stops processing logic and starts interpreting the chaos as an immediate physical threat to our survival. The nervous system interprets crises through ancestral stress. Families pass down the physiological weight of unresolved trauma. When that historical weight hits a present-day emergency, compounding pressure overwhelms the system, feeling like the universe has singled you out. But while this inherited weight feels like a deliberate curse, it serves a specific function. This intense, agonizing pressure is the exact environment required to break a generational cycle permanently. To understand how to survive this pressure, we can look at the ancient biblical metaphor of sifting wheat, a concept explicitly tied to the extreme trials of figures like Job and Simon Peter. The mechanical process of sifting is inherently violent. A farmer has to aggressively shake the sieve to throw the wheat into the air. This harsh motion is the only way to separate the valuable, sustaining grain from the worthless, lightweight dirt and chaff. The text outlines two competing intentions in this process. The enemy applies this violent shaking to prove a person's faith is conditional and fragile, but a higher power permits the sifting for a completely different reason, to refine the individual by aggressively stripping away their superficial comforts. Amy Beetle applied this mechanical logic to her own history. She recognized that the psychiatric disorders inherited from her biological father were the specific tools required to dismantle a generational labyrinth, turning an inherited burden into a path for healing. Stepping into the sifting room means you are not being randomly torn apart by the chaos of a family crisis. You are being aggressively shaken to drop the useless chaff, preparing you to carry a new mantle of resilience. The ultimate extreme of this testing process involves physical or emotional isolation, creating an intense psychological friction known as the refiner's fire. In metallurgy, a forge applies immense controlled heat. That intense temperature is scientifically necessary to separate pure silver and gold from the rough edges and impurities known as the dross. This is a lived reality for families navigating the criminal justice system. As Beetle faced the agonizing reality of her own son Kobe facing jail time, she drew directly on her own deeply isolating times spent analyzing scripture inside a prison cell. She points specifically to the historical account in the book of Acts, where Paul and Silas are locked in an inner dungeon, their feet physically bolted into wooden stocks. Instead of succumbing to the panic of the environment, they hijacked it. By raising their voices to sing and trusting their divine foundation, they converted a space designed strictly for punishment into an active spiritual workshop. The internal friction of choosing faith in the absence of every comfort creates the actual heat of the refining process. Once the heat of the fire burns those distractions away, a person is finally forced to confront their long-buried traumatic memories, what Beetle refers to as soul fractals. Decrypting these painful memories requires immense care. By leaning entirely on divine understanding rather than personal logic, a person can safely process these traumas without being consumed by the pain of the past. Surviving this internal war requires specific defensive tools. The biblical texts outline this as donning the armor of God. One piece of this defense is explicitly designed for mobility, the shoes of the gospel of peace. These act as sturdy, protective footwear, enabling a person to keep walking straight through highly chaotic, unpredictable terrain. This piece provides an unshakable internal anchor that remains steady regardless of the surrounding volatility. By lacing up these shoes, you establish a fortress inside your own mind. No matter how aggressively your external environment or family dynamics spiral, your internal baseline remains fully protected. The immense, suffocating pressure of a family crisis is rarely a death sentence. It is the highly uncomfortable birthing room of a new promise. Under this much pressure, the immediate temptation is to retreat into old, destructive coping mechanisms. Pushing through the birthing process requires adopting strict daily habits to protect your mental state. First, connect with the ultimate healer. Stepping outside into nature, even for just a few minutes of breathing, acts as a chemical reset switch that pulls your nervous system out of an active panic state. Second, cultivate an inner sanctuary. By maintaining a calm mind through quiet spiritual practices, you train yourself to make decisions firmly grounded in love, rather than reacting out of fear. Third, fiercely protect your physical vessel. You have to take strict control over your inputs. Shutting off toxic media and prioritizing your sleep are absolute necessities to endure the wear and tear of spiritual warfare. The intense friction of life will test your endurance. The violent shaking of the sieve will challenge your psychological foundation. But when you recognize that the pressure is strictly designed to separate the heavy grain from the worthless chaff, you stop fighting the heat. You lace up your shoes of peace, and you emerge from the fire completely unbroken.